Hi, everybody. Welcome to the July 2022 OLUG meeting. Let's see, I had three pieces of news that I picked up in the last few days. The first one was a survey showing that Rocky Linux is actually pulling away from Alma Linux on most popularity. And I'm happy that that's happening. I don't really hate Alma Linux, but I'm glad to see that Rocky has some momentum. The other one was a new malware that's going in routers, including ASUS routers, which is the one I have, and pretty much right now, the best way to get rid of it is to reboot it. I have a link to that in the Discord channel, and I now reboot the router, both of my ASUSs that I'm running once a week, just for fun. The last one today is it came up yesterday on Hackaday. And so if you know the program language Scratch, which is a graphical language where you grab blocks into a list of instructions and put them together, somebody is actually using Scratch to configure a kernel. So check that out on hackaday.com. I think it's .com, and that was out yesterday. So that's all I've got. Anybody else shouting around the room for news?
When you say Rocky is pulling away, do you mean it's
becoming more entrenched?
Right,
more entrenched?
More entrenched.
Momentum.
We somewhat arbitrarily chose Alma, but it's neither here nor there.
It's not gonna be hard to switch back. I mean, it's not like a huge barrier between Alma and Rocky.
Well, yeah, exactly. Well, and the reason our shop chose it is the idea that it was not owned by any individuals, I think. So.
Okay.
Just curious.
One schedule note. So right now, I don't have a presenter for August. It's August 2nd. I won't be here on August 2nd. I'm probably going to be out of town. And I'd like to set everything up a little earlier than I usually do. So if you're interested in presenting, please let me know. In September, I'm going to present on Zavix Enterprise monitoring system. I still have open slots for October and November. So if you are interested, please give me a ring. John?
I will too be also, I will also be out of town on August.
Okay. So
if you do find a speaker,
yes,
it should be Zoom mode.
Okay.
Just to make it easier for everybody involved.
Okay. So Zoom only for the August 2nd speaker. Okay. That's it. All right. So James Harr and I have been working at the Omaha Maker Group for a while. And I found out that James really likes PROXMOX. And I really like PROXMOX. And I've been working with PROXMOX for about 9 months. And I pretty much decided that even though I do vSphere and things like that for checking things with work, I really want everything that I want on a regular basis. I'm going to put it into PROXMOX. So James is going to be doing a tour of it tonight. And I'm going to turn it over to him now.
And there was much rejoicing. So I'm James Harr. Just a bit of background for me is I've been doing Linux things, and for quite a while I jumped into networking for a while, and now I'm back into writing code and running operating systems. But my first foray into virtualization was when we had a VMware setup, and I remember the look on my boss's face when I put all of our domain controllers on his desk and for him to walk into. He didn't realize that I had virtualized them. So that was a fun one. He's came to my office and said, "James, what are these?" So anyway, personally, I don't know what people already know and what they don't, so I'm taking a guess here. If I'm moving too slow, comment. If you have any questions, interrupt me and I'll just answer them. Instead of doing screenshots, I just figured I'd pull up a screen and kind of show you what the UI looks like, and tour around some of the features. So again, we'll see how that goes. I haven't timed this yet, so I don't know how long it's going to take. So let me get my cursor in the right window. There we go. So just a little bit of outline of what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to tell you, sort of explain a little bit of what it is, what it's built on, how you can get it installed, what it might be good for, what it might not be good for. Talk a little bit about how you can spin up VMs and containers on it. It's actually one of the things I kind of liked about it is you can, instead of just VM only, you can also spin up LXC containers. They're a little bit different than Docker containers, so I'll talk a little bit about those differences. Talk about storage options, kind of how you can configure networking in these things. A lot of this will relate back to if you've done networking in Linux traditionally, creating link aggregations and VLAN interfaces. It'll feel a lot like that, just with the UI in front of it. Talk about the clustering options and including whether or not you want your storage to be clustered, and then go back to storage to talk about that part, and then backups and restores on it to kind of show what it looks like. And the backups and restores are part that I haven't, I've just recently got into about 2 weeks ago, so that's mostly going to be me winging it. So PROXMOX is an organization. It was originally founded in 2005. I want to say it was around 2008 that they created the virtualization environment. They've been doing that since, and they offer 3 products really. It's the virtualization environment, Mail Gateway, which was their first one, and then most recently the backup server. It's headquartered in Vienna, Austria, so if you have any purchase orders to do for work, you're going to have to figure that out, international pricing. And I don't think they typically do it through resellers, so that's always fun if you have to do that. So they might, I don't know. So it is so the virtualization environment's one product they make. It's based on Debian. Like it or hate it, that's their base. So it actually comes with an install ISO if you want. Like that's probably the recommended way that they to get it on your machine. But you can, if you really want to, start with the base Debian install and then add PROXMOX on top of it. It's not necessarily, they say it's less supportable, but I mean, for all intents and purposes, that's kind of how they built their installer, so it's not terrible. It's a tool for hosting VMs and containers. It uses QEMU or KVM for the VMs, and then the containers, it uses LXC, and those are a little bit different than Docker containers. It's probably possible to take like a standard Docker build, like I have this like slimmed down application only image and I want to run something on it, but these tend to use LXC containers, which are a little, tend to run something like systemd or some init is the root process, and you're installing services and other things inside it. So it functions a lot more like a VM. Overall, it has a pretty nice, well-rounded set of features. It's not perfect, nothing is. It's got its own quirks. I might call a few of those out if I think of them. It has a web UI for management as well as an API and a fairly decent CLI, like for creating one. If you just want to, like, you don't want to necessarily make a REST call, you have a bash script to spin up some instances and you just want to run it on a PROXMOX host, you can just run those, and there's a way to create images and import disks and do all sorts of things. So in terms of features, it has a pretty snappy UI. You can have a clustered management, and this is one of the differences between something like vSphere or another virtualization tool, is that with vSphere, there's like, you have a separate management console. A lot of times it's hosted inside the VM platform, but it doesn't need to be. And you log into that. This is a little different. Once you get a cluster set up, you can log into any node and just manage your VMs from there. There's not really the idea of a central management. Positives and negatives there, but mostly I think it works well for the application I'm looking for. For disk management, a lot of it's going to seem somewhat familiar. I mean, some of it's abstracted, so you don't really see it. You can go in and look at it. It just uses, for the most part, you're going to use, like local storage, you're going to use LVM or something like that for managing VM disks and things like that. But there's some other options. It supports all the common things like NFS and iSCSI. One that we're using is Ceph RBD, which is Rados block device, I think, which is a replicated storage type. It can also support high availability, which is where you have n number of nodes and you have node 7 die. And the other cluster nodes say, hey, we still have a quorum. We saw node 7 die. We're going to take all the VMs on there and start them up over here. So I haven't played with that, but it's something that can be done. It also has per VNIC firewalling, so you can go in and you can create firewall rules on an individual. I guess not per VNIC, per VM firewalling. So that's an error on my slides, but more or less, you just go in and you create rules as if you were creating them in IP tables. There's a little UI to do it. It's not fancy. Doesn't look great, but it's useful. So, and like I said, it's built on Debian. It uses KVM and LXC and other standard Linux components to kind of make everything work. So just because I know this is the sort of the reference that people have is when you look at it, compared to VMware, VMware, like one of the complaints I had, and I know a lot of people have had, is usually you go to install the newer version of VMware, you can get it for free, ESXi at least. And you go to install it and it's like, oh, your CPU is too old. Well, this doesn't have it. You can get the newest version, it's just not going to run, like if you need a new CPU for whatever workload you're running, it's not going to do that. So it's got firewalling built in, storage management's built in, there's a UI for it. Like I said, there's LXC containers, and this is, okay, so this sounds really silly, but serial consoles I actually really like, because when you're doing them with a VM, you can actually copy and paste text out of them, which is really handy if you just need to like vomit a whole bunch of commands into something to set it up. And this licensing is really simple. Like by default, like you can, like when you install it, it's like you don't have a subscription, you can't get updates. Well, if you go dig around on their wiki, there's a community repo for it, which is it's basically the community updates. It's the streaming updates that are before it kind of gets validated. And I've never had a problem with it, but you can look around, you'll be able to get updates to it pretty easily. And like I said, I've never had problems. The licensing level, if you just want official updates and you want to give them a little bit of money because you like the product, it's really cheap. It's like $100 per socket or something like that. And so it's really inexpensive. The higher levels of support, you get 4-hour responses, you get remote support, that type of thing. So what you don't get in comparison, the firewall probably isn't as fancy as you would get from NSX. There's a lot of networking features, like if you want to create virtual routers and those things, it's not going to be quite the same. There's nothing quite like DRS. And so DRS in VMware, what I know it as, is the thing that says, hey, you have a lot of VMs on this host and not a lot over here. You have a lot of resources available. So I'm going to move some things around to make it better. It doesn't automatically do that for you. Or like I need to start up a VM, where should I put it? And it will pick the emptiest host to put it on. There's no OVA import, although you can use local tools to do that. There's some stuff in the wiki about it. And then there's a whole bunch of like VMware ecosystem, like if you just want to import VMs, like those are, again, that's kind of the OVA thing of just like go import it. There's none of that really there, but it kind of has its own separate forum for kind of sharing some of those ideas. The other thing is that when you set up a cluster, there's no concept of like, I have a data center and I have 7 clusters in it, or 2 or 3 clusters even. You know, whereas VMware will have that idea, so you can manage it all through one UI. When you create a cluster, that's management for that cluster, as far as I know anyway. And you don't really say, I'm going to manage 3 clusters through one UI. So 1 cluster, 1 UI, 1 API. So that's kind of, so I'm going to try, and we'll see how this works. I'm going to log into PROXMOX, pull up the web UI, just kind of show some console stuff, and we'll see if, actually that, let's just get out of this for a minute. And then, let me, oh, question?
Okay, so when you're saying firewall, it's not, that's different than something like a V switch, right?
Yeah, so,
Do they have the equivalent of a V switch? I haven't played this.
kind of. So, I mean, so when you're saying vSwitch, you just mean, do you want to create like, do you want to create a little private VLAN or private network to connect all VMs together? Is that what you're looking at doing with vSwitch? Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can just create like, so if they were all on one host, which is the simplest one, what you do is you go into network, I'd create a new Linux bridge, and I'd create some arbitrary number. You know, apparently I exceeded some limit there, and you wouldn't necessarily have to put in an IP address, but you can just create, say, auto start, and when you create that, this is again where it's based on Linux, it's actually showing you the diff to the network interfaces file and what's going to add. And you don't even have to like tie it to a physical interface, you just do it there. It also has OVS support, which I haven't messed with, so I'm not going to talk about it because I don't know anything about it. But that's where if you wanted to create an overlay network between different hosts that don't know about a VLAN, you can do that. But yeah, so it's pretty easy. You just create a bridge is all. I mean, because that's, yeah, when you're done, like if you don't want to apply that, if I wanted to create that, I can apply, but I can also hit revert and go back to what it was. So this is the UI. There's different views in here. So this is a host-oriented or server-oriented view where I'm looking at VDEV1. It's what we named our virtualization hosts, and then there's a container, there's some VMs, and then there's storage in each one. If I click on the host, I can get into, do all the standard things like look at the CPU and RAM. This is actually kind of nice. It's silly, but it's one of those little things that's just really nice. If I'm logged into this as root, which I am, I hit shell and I have shell on the machine. So I don't need to like pop open another SSH session. You can just, just do all that from here if you need to. And it's just it's a nicety. So if I'm looking at individual VMs in here, so when you look at the UI, there's going to be different. Don't forget to click at some of these top levels because there's some options here you can set up, including the firewall, like I was talking. So let's go look at the firewall for one of these things. So let's look at one of these. So this is a pretty boring one, but I'm actually using what they call a security group. It's not quite like AWS's security groups. All it is it's a template of rules. So this all gets expanded out and gets applied to this VM. I'm sorry, this is boring, but I'll show you the security group first. Probably give you a better idea of what it looks like. So I define the security group at the data center level, and then the security group here looks like this. And this is on a really small screen, so pardon the scrolling, but it's pretty much exactly like what you'd expect out of IP tables and UI is, what's your action? It's accept, drop or reject. You get a source and you get a destination. Your source can be IP sets if you want. Those IP sets can be defined at the data center level, and then all the hosts will share those IP sets. So if you change it once, changes it everywhere. Source and destination port, but that's pretty much it. Yeah, you define the rules in a security group, and then what I've done is applied these two security groups to various machines. So this one just has that KDEV control group defined. Just hit the insert security group, and then this one has the same thing. So if I add a new node to that rule set, or if I add a new node, I just have to go alter the original rule set that's defined at the data center level. So it is kind of nice. It's not as fancy as like VMware NSX, I think, will infer what addresses workloads have. So it says, oh, hey, you have a workload with this tag, and I'm going to include that in this group, for you automatically. This doesn't have that. So it's not super fancy. So, but yeah, so when I create let me pop open one of the consoles here. So this is going to be easier if I pop open a console. So let's make this scale. Let's see what's on. Should be, nope. Oh, scaling mode, local scaling. So all this is using OpenText. Like this is a thing called no VNC, which I think is just like VNC and HTML, but it's all pretty standard. I had a browser tab pulled up inside this VM, and this is me going up to Ann Arbor, Michigan, and then playing a video, and it's actually like reasonably fluid for a VM console and not intending to be like for a user using it. I was really hoping to have more action in a video, but
It's an ad.
yeah, it probably is an ad. That's probably the most animation I'm gonna get out of the video, just because of my poor selection.
So you can skip.
Yeah. So anyway, I just wanted to demonstrate that it is like a reasonably snappy UI for being HTML5 and me going like to Michigan to do this. But right now I'm just using I think it's a Linux Mint workstation. But one of the things I did was I ran this command. So I added a serial device to this, and I ran a command to enable logins on the serial console. It's basically the same thing. Like if you're using systemd, it's going to be the same command on every distro. And what I can do now is instead of opening up this no VNC thing, I can actually pop open an xterm.js console, which is exactly like what I was talking about. I can actually select and copy text. If I have a text editor or some playbook or manual playbook, I can copy and paste text in, which is always nice. It gets a little goofy when you get to line wrapping. I don't have a good solution to that other than just have everything prepared before you type it. So yeah, that's a little bit of the UI. I'm going to go back to the slides. I'm going to go back and do more demo, but there's a few more, but I will keep going from here. And I'm just going to leave that in window mode. Talking a little bit about VMs and containers. So the VMs are KVM based, and it's everything you'd expect. The thing I didn't know that KVM could do, and QEMU specifically, is you can hot add and remove disks. I think you can hot add some pieces of hardware to it. This is, if people want to, I can demo this, but you can actually live migrate a workload between nodes. But I can also just live migrate the disk storage. So if I have like a disk that I want to get things off of, like I just installed a new SSD, I have a workload running, I can move this disk for this VM over from one to another. So it can also can actually do live migration between physical hosts, and it can also and even when the storage is local, it'll take a really long time, especially if you have gigs and you don't have fast network, but it can do it.
Got some chat.
Oh yeah, yeah. Let's pause for questions. People
Are
have-
the VM IDs fixed or dynamic?
So you can define them when you create them. You do have an option of you do have an option of specifying them. But once you create a VM, you more or less don't change it. Don't plan on changing it. It's annoying because, by the way, these different views. So I have a server view, folder view, storage view. When I go into folder view, it groups all the VMs together. It sorts by that ID. And again, this is one of those quirks where nothing's perfect. It doesn't sort the machines by alphabetical order. It sorts them by the VM ID. So a common thing that we're going to start doing, probably at least for production stuff, is to assign IDs in a range. Kind of feels silly to do that, but yeah. Very common for templates to be assigned as well.
That's what mine are.
Yeah.
And it's like, I've got
Ranges, yeah.
I've got a range of, for instance, I call them Ansible targets, the things that I'm playing with to configure.
Yeah.
And so those are all like a certain range.
Yeah.
Okay, and then that answered the question, can you sort my names?
So you not in this view, but if you pull open if you pull open the actual virtual machines or like the data center level, you can't actually hit the drop down and change the columns to split out name and ID and then sort here. So yeah, you can sort by name. You can also just search for it. I almost rarely use this, but you know, it does work. So you can just search for like mail, you know, show me that thing.
There's the header name and the
Yep.
Okay, can you live add RAMs or expand disk?
Expand disk, yes. That's pretty trivial. Let me go look at this one. All you really have to do is hardware, go select the disk you want, and disk action, resize. It only gives you increase, doesn't give you decrease. But I think that's probably no surprise to people. I don't know, let me see if I can do -1. It's not. So.
Is that dependent on SCSI, being a SCSI disk?
As far as I know,
Sometimes that defines like as data or.
I don't actually know that answer.
Okay.
I would suspect it's probably not. So in terms of memory, if I want to change this, I wish it gave me the option to do gigs, but 10,000. What's going to happen here is it's going to actually show the change, not what I actually put in. And what this orange means is it's basically, these are the settings it's going to take the next time it boots up from the full boots. You can revert it and get back to whatever it was. You might be able to add memory. I think it's just one of those things you have to set it up ahead of time. I know that there's like, when you're creating, yeah, I think it does. Yeah, let's try it. I'll shut down this VM. We'll give it a try. And so as soon as this thing gets shut down, you'll see.
You take it when you're making a change like that, you have to go shut down.
Yeah. There are certain things that you will always have to do. So when I do a start, so disk expansion, again, like I said, it'll just take effect immediately. In fact, you'll see like, if you have a VM that's Linux running, you look at tmessage, you'll see like the standard things like, hey, something happened on the disk, I'm rescanning, hey, there's more space here. Oh, Numa needs to be enabled for upload. We need to go find out what that's right? What's that?
Yeah, search for the option.
Probably not. I think it actually shows it. Enable. So the other thing that's the default processor here is KVM64. It gives you a whole bunch. If you don't have a reason to, and I don't know if there's any performance hits for this, KVM64 is pretty reasonable. On some newer Linux distributions, like when I was trying Alumni, it was saying that the CPU type is not supported when I tried to boot it up, the installer. So if we set it to host, more than likely it's going to work. As far as I can tell, these are like the instructions, like, you know, it supports SSE2 and all these different, you know, instruction sets. Like, that's as far as I know what this actually does. I don't truly know.
I've had some luck matching the CPU type to the CPU type on the hypervisor.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, I believe that.
That's a follow-on question to that is, do you, or can you live migrate mixed CPU types?
Don't know. So you know, this is where I don't know the answer to it. All the machines in here are the same processor.
Yeah.
The physical hosts are the same processor, so I don't know for sure. Oh, really? Come on. Must be aligned to 512. Okay.
8190.
512 megs. Okay.
No.
Yeah, 8192. That's funny. All right, try this again. So I think we're just discovering all the reasons you may not want to do hot plug CPU memory. So yeah, let's watch this. So I'm going to make this window just a little bit. It'd be raining outside. But actually working.
Man, you should see a lot of water coming down the street. The temperature certainly.
Jess has not initialized the display yet. Oh,
It's getting there.
no, it's not. It would have been up by now.
It's gone way done.
Yeah. Well, we'll go back a little bit on this. So again, this is something I haven't really. Let's try one thing.
Do the hot close.
Yep. You need oh, yeah, that's right. So we need to enable them. I need to.
Chad Bowman says, live migrate is yes, provided destination has adequate resources.
Yep. Okay. So I suspect people have. All right. Let's refresh this, and this is not initialized display yet.
Wow, look at that.
How's the roof in here?
Well, when you go to check the places that normally be.
So I'm wondering if this is one of those things where if I didn't install something on the install of that VM. Yeah. Yeah, so this is about how it normally looks. You'll see like this, which is more or less like the BIOS. This is the serial console. This is the VM. Scaling again. Yeah, so it boots pretty snappy. Like, I mean, I'm also using local storage because I don't care if this thing dies. And we do have replicated storage set up, but it's getting funneled through a gig Ethernet NIC. So, yeah. Anyway, it's a menu option. I don't know if it works well, but it's a menu option. So, I think.
What kind of, does it have video cards, the server? And if so, like how many gigabytes of RAM are on your video card?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that one. Can you say that again?
Do you have video cards by any chance to make it?
In these servers? No, I don't.
That makes it snappy, or?
What was the last part of that?
Yeah.
I put it in chat.
Oh, we put some.
Okay.
Okay, video cards. I don't know. I don't have any in mind.
I don't have any in mind either. I do know that you can do PCI pass-through. If you know the device, you can go through and select it and pass it through. I haven't done this, no experience doing it. My intent at one point was to use this for a Plex server, so I might try it at some point, but I have no experience with this. There's wiki posts and wiki articles and forum posts about it. And they actually have like a pretty decent wiki for if they do write about it, it's legible and not just like someone putting a whole bunch of commands that don't actually work. So yeah, any other questions before we go on? I got probably about halfway through. I can cruise along a little bit faster. Yeah, Aaron?
How does it work with Windows 11?
Never tried it. So we are a Mac and Linux only shop. We do not have a single Windows server.
What was that question?
I'm not.
Are you hiring?
Huh?
Are you hiring?
Yeah. I don't know if we're doing systems. We're doing network engineers.
This is where it comes down to the subtle, not you.
Yeah.
Okay. Rob also says XCP NGS recommends the AMP because the drivers are not licensed.
Gotcha.
Over 80%.
One of the things that I do know is that I've never done PCI pass-through to a Linux container, but I do know that it goes through the VM, and at that point, it's the VM's responsibility for the drivers. So, and is that what's called the SRIRV in VMware? I don't know much about it, but it's basically PCI pass-through. When you do that, like, you're obviously not getting live migration at that point because your hardware, you're tied to hardware, but you can still shut down and move it. Any more questions, or we can move on? No more questions. All right. So does anybody here know the difference between LXC containers and Docker?
LXC used to be used by Doc. They were engine now.
Okay.
So I mean, everything you do like Docker. I mean,
Yeah.
LXC is just.
So yeah. Well, in theory, they are. You know, they're compatible with each other. I've never tried to take a Docker image and pull it in. In theory, you could do it, but in practice, if you're looking for pre-built containers, LXC is you have a Debian container. It has systemd installed. You install like the process to actually get it up and running is I create a new LXC container based on this Debian image that is probably not customized, and then I treat it like a VM where I start installing SSH and then all these other things in it. It's a little bit nicer because when you create the LXC container, you can say like, here's my password for it, here's my SSH keys, here's the IP address that's going on the container. But other than that, it mostly acts like a VM. You can also hot add and remove memory and CPUs from it because it's just everything under the hood is Linux C groups and namespaces. So like all the constructs are there, but you're not going to run VSD in LXC containers. So. And typically, again, LXC containers are long-lived. Whereas you compare that to Docker containers, the root product, like you're probably not running systemd or whatever init process. Most of the customizations are done at build time when you make the container image. And again, like you're kind of expecting to create and delete these a lot. So, Aaron, if you want, I can share the slides, or are you just? Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I'll create a VM. I might go along more quickly just in the interest of time. So again, the creation process is pretty straightforward. But if I want to create a VM, I'm going to call it, give it a name. The name you can change after the fact. The VM ID is automatically allocated. Usually, again, that first 100, the numbering starts at 100. The first however many 100, first set of IDs is just kind of trash. Like, you just don't plan on managing that. You can check start a boot. It's all sort of the standard options that you have. I am going to create this. I'm going to do it on this one. I actually have an ISO image on this thing. You select an ISO image off of a data store that you want, and go through. typically, the agent is something, I've only really ever used it to like basically provide info up to the hypervisor, like IP addressing and things like that. And supposedly you can use it when you're doing backups to like say, hey, databases calm down for a little bit. If you do something like, there's two different types. I don't actually know what the difference is. Some of these methods are supposed to be faster. So I tried it out. I don't notice a difference, but it's a newer piece of hardware that's emulating. You can support EFI if you want. Then this might actually help you with Windows 11 support, where you need a TPM storage. I don't actually, never tried that.
Chad said Windows 11 and Windows 2022 both work with it. If you do
Oh, cool. Awesome. I've never used that, so thank you for replying. And then you get into disk management. So I'm actually going to do something a little different here. Instead of actually installing an OS like I was showing, I'm going to go back and say I'm not going to use any media. And for disks, yeah, I'll just keep using it. I'm going to delete the disk. Now, normally you could add this in. By the way, how many people know about SSD trim? Okay, so all it is your operating system way of telling the hardware, the SSD in your laptop, I am no longer using this block. So do with it what you may.
It's like
And
garbage collection.
yeah,
That's awesome.
because SSDs don't, block 172 is not always in the same spot. It gets mapped around on to do wear leveling. And the more free space it has, the better it can do that. So what that actually shows up here is discard. It sounds like you're going to throw away changes written to it, but that actually just means take SSD.
That's the hardware function.
Yeah. Yeah. And beyond that, I have no idea what SSD emulation is. So, but anyway, I'm going to delete the disk. I'm going to show you how to import what's called one of the distribution cloud images, which I think is worthwhile. Don't need much here. There's a whole bunch of CPU and memory options, networking. I'm going to throw this one in. And then, again, for the NIC model, you can have more NICs later, but if you stick with vert.io, if your operating system supports it, it's supposed to be decent performance. Correct me if I'm wrong, but so I'm going to create this. What I'm actually going to do, that's on VDev. What is it? So this is on VDev 1. So I'm going to pop up in that node. I got
Two questions.
okay, go ahead.
Does PROXMOX come with any OS templates?
So LXC it does, LXC containers, and I'll show you where those show up.
Okay.
Those are, I don't actually know if those are managed by PROXMOX, but they're there. It's not that hard to create. I've never done LXC templates myself, but it's not hard to create. If you've done disk images for VMs, it's not hard to do that. In fact, like what I have here is a Alma Linux cloud image, and if you go look for like, let's see, okay, so if you go into the ISO download, usually you can like kind of navigate around a little bit. And there's usually a cloud folder. If you look around for disk images, you'll see something like this, where it's a generic cloud or a cloud image of some kind. And all this is this is a 10 gig disk template that has some special functionality built in. And it's basically built so that you can boot it up, give it IP address from the hosts, the VM host, and I'm going to demo that. So I downloaded this ahead of time. And I have this OLUG demo 1, which is VMID 115. I'm going to say QM import disk. Let's see how far I get with this. I'm going to give it the ISO image, and then I'm going to give it the data store to use. And I know on this VM, let's see what I have for data stores. I'm going to use local NVMe2 dash BLK. It's just my name, actually. Local NVMe2 dash BLK. So I have to do this through the CLI. There's an API to do this, I haven't messed with it, and there's no way to do this through the web UI. But I have just an image downloaded into my root, like /root folder, because I'm a terrible human. And I'm going to import it in as a disk. And when I pop open this thing here, it's going to show in hardware, hey, look, new unused disk. It's associated with this VM ID, but it's not, I don't have an assigned iSCSI ID. So to assign it, you just double click on it. Enable the option. I wish this was default. I know that someday it is. You assign it a SCSI ID, which is like, it'll do the next one automatically. And then I hit add. And as soon as I do that, that's all you have to do to assign it. Now, if you want to go back, all you have to do is go into the disk. I think you just hit detach, and that will put it back in the state it was. So it's just basically saying this disk image is associated, but it's managed with it, but it's not actually connected to the OS. So I have that disk image here. I have to go actually modify the boot order as well. It's a new image, and I want this to boot before the network. But what I can also do is create, there's this cloud init section here, and this is what I'm talking about. I have to add a special cloud init drive, and what cloud init is it's it's a 4 meg ISO 9660 image that just has some YAML in it that the OS knows to.
It's like a bootstrap.
Yeah, exactly. And so you can provide it like username, password, some IP config. It's hopefully that's not taken. We'll find out if it is. Give it some addressing, and what's supposed to. Oh yeah, one last thing. This is something I always have to remember to do. Add that serial port, which gives you that console that I showed. So I'm going to start this. I'm going to pop this open so it shows up. But what Cloud Init does, and again, this isn't strictly to PROXMOX, but unless I screwed something up, we'll find that out. Okay, so it's going to boot Alma. And the first thing it's going to do is it's actually going to, oops, oh yeah, this is that CPU thing. My bad. So I'm going to stop this. And I'm actually going to take the processor, and instead of KVM 64, it's going to be host, which passes through the host's CPU info. Before I boot this up, I'm going to actually expand this drive. I'm going to give it another 40 gigs, because by default it's 10. But what Cloud Init will do is, on boot, it will actually grow to, it'll hamster grow with the size of the drive it's on automatically. So you don't have to like repartition it. You don't have to like go through and do the grow in the file system. If an image supports Cloud Init, it will handle all that on its own. The other thing it's supposed to do, and again, we'll see if this actually works, because again, live demo, is it should supposedly, and it may or may not do this, it's supposed to actually do system updates on its own when you boot. So yeah, it's still not up, but let's see. So I should actually see DNF upgrade being run. And in some installs, you'll actually see that in the background, but that's the first thing it does. What most Cloud Init images do. Yeah, like, so if you can
worry about your Red Hat kickstart stuff anymore.
Yeah, I mean, like, there are some Cloud Init things that you can do to like, okay, run this script on boot, but I've never played with them. Like, that gets into the API territory because there's no like, here's the YAML I want for my Cloud Init. It's not automatically there. And if you do want to use a template, what you can actually do is I can pop open a terminal VDEV1 that's being hosted. I can go to Etsy, PROXMOX-VE, and if I look at the file system tree in here, you can actually see the config for all these different things. So I know it's on VDEV1, so I'm going to go into nodes, VDEV1, and then there's a QEMU server. And I think if I actually look up, what was it, 115? you can actually see some of the CI stands for cloud init. And you can actually see all the parameters for it. This is where the VM config is stored if you ever need to get there, including like, I think there's somewhere in here where you can actually set the serial number if you really need that for the box. So, but there is a way to pass in a cloud init. Like here is my cloud init settings as a YAML file. Yeah, so anyway, any questions on this cloud init related things? What's that?
I said, no, I just want to go play with it.
Yeah, it's worth playing. And in fact, they're working on, they have an API to import it, which might be supported by like Ansible things to import the disk image, but CTL is system running. Yeah, so it's running. So I'm gonna do, oops. Just since I can, I'm gonna take this entire disk image and just do migrate. It's using local storage. I'm going to migrate to VDEF2. And it's actually kind of neat if you watch it in the back end. It's pretty like, I'm surprised at how well this works out of the box. Like I'm pleasantly surprised. This console will eventually die, I think, but it will restart. But it's doing the whole thing that VMware will do with like doing active, like watching for derby pages on this. So, I don't know, where do people want to go with this? I can keep going.
Did the update finish or is it still running?
The update finished. So I've done this during updates. It was on a throwaway machine, so I didn't really care. But I have done it, and it did continue to work. Yeah, so I think the disk mirroring is the thing that's going to take the longest because it has to copy, you know, it has to copy like 40 gigs or 50 gigs worth of zeros. So again, not the perfect thing. If you can't use cluster storage, there it goes. So it does use some compression, so it should do better, but I'll let that run.
Well, I mean, it's mostly empty disk, so.
Yeah, but it actually, I think it does. It actually has to scan through it though, even though it's empty disk. So which
If NVMe, it should go with that.
I think that the bottleneck actually is not the NVMe, it's the gig mix that this is being shoved through.
Okay, so it's not.
Yeah.
You're not an in-memory network.
Yeah, exactly. So
Chad says, much better with replication.
yeah, it is. Yeah. So one of the things I can do is I can, if you want, I can show it to you, but I can actually move the disks over to, I can move the disks over to clustered storage, in which case it doesn't have to migrate the disks. And so, while this is running, everything kind of has like this output status, all the jobs, and then the jobs will show up down here. If you need to, you can right click and cancel them. Or if I want to like see the status, I'll make a double click and I'll pull that thing back up and I can watch lines of text scroll by as I nervously wait for this thing to complete. Yeah, so anyway, I'll continue on while that's going in the background because you'll probably see this blip here for a second. And then what I actually probably need to do is I need to, is it capital O to show outstanding things, the ones that aren't, actually. I'm going to move along just because I've already gone for an hour. So there's different kinds of data storage in PROXMOX. There's really kind of two options that there's two classes. There's block and file. Block storage is really good for disk images, container volumes. You can't store ISOs in there. You can't store container templates. And then there's file-based, which is where you store your ISOs or container templates. They even have this thing called snippets, which is like I have a script that I want to run every time this boots up, or every time this VM boots, I want to run this thing. I don't know what that's used for. I've seen some examples in the forums. You can also store VZ dump backups there. You can't actually store disk images or disk volumes in file-based data stores, but it's not recommended. I don't know the reasoning for this, but it's like storing your QCOW2 on there. I think there's some management applications, but on their wiki they have a whole list of things. The two or three that I've used are ZFS oriented, CFFS oriented, or LVM or LVM thin. And LVM thin is a basically like I'm going to create a 100 gig disk, but I'm not actually going to take that out of my LVM pool. They're a little tricky to create, but they're kind of nice in that respect. And one of the really nice features of this is if you enable that disk trim support, like I showed in the VM images, if I have a VM that is, 5 gigs worth of data, 100 gigs worth of disk, but there's only 5 gigs of usable data, I go download a 20 gig file, then delete it. When I download that 20 gig file, it'll chew up more of that disk space in that LVM volume group. But when I delete that 20 gig file, it should automatically shrink that back. So it's a good way of reclaiming that disk space, is enabling that discard support. So that checkbox is useful, especially with LVM thin provisioning. Why not? You kind of have it, gives you extra snapshots. So one of the things I did want to cover, I think I kind of glossed over this, is the disk storage. So there's different ways to create this. If I go down to the node level, when I go into disks, I can create, if I already have like an LVM volume group, I already have one in here, but if I had a thin pool already created, I could just go in here and select it and then create a data store out of it. Or what I've done here is I've actually created on the command line on each of these. And then in the data center, when I go into the data storage options, this is kind of one of the weird things, is like you'll see the same sort of things under nodes and under data center. What I'm doing here is in here though, is I'm basically taking an existing storage pool or volume mount or whatever, and I'm recognizing it in the PROXMOX UI. So when I hit add LVM thin, it's gonna, I get to basically already specify my thin pool here, and I can type in values.
Migration definitions.
Yeah, yep. So there's the standard like live migration thing. Yeah, it worked. It didn't blow up. So lost a ping in there. So usually sufficient enough to keep most traffic going. So anyway, these, like one of the things you can do here is that I took servers that are identically configured. They all have the same LVM volume thin provision pool that's the same name across all of them. And I basically go in and I say, yes, this volume is the same across all of them. So when I do that vMotion or that live migration between the two, it just automatically picks the same volume. So it's using that local NVMe2 block, which is our naming convention. You can also change like what's storable in these things. So if you have a file-based storage, you can go in and say, hey, I'd actually like to store snippets in here too. You just check that box, you hit OK, and then it's just a UI thing to recognize it. I think that's as far as I really want to go right now, because I think there's that's a big rabbit hole, and I'm already kind of going longer than I was going to. But those are the two site types, file and block. And if I go into a file-based storage, you can actually see it here. I can see ISO images. I can see, you can actually even download from a URL. So like if I'm working remotely and I want to download something, they have, a 10 gig internet connection. I just hit download from URL, punch in the URL, and then it will be suddenly available there, much faster than if I downloaded it and re-uploaded it. Container templates, there's a few that are included. There's Debian, Ubuntu, Debian, Alpine, Fedora, and they're pretty good about updating these. They're not, I don't think I see Rocky in there, interesting.
I did.
Oh, you did? Okay, there, yay. And there's a bunch of turnkey Linux things. There's Ubuntu in there. Yeah, so it's got the standards. I know if you can find the LXC images, you can just download from URL, give it a URL to download. And then when you create an LXC container, and I go to VDEV1, and what am I missing? Oh, it's apparently just a terrible password. And I go into templates, that's where you get to select which ones. So you can pick, okay, this is Debian 11, here's my disk for that. And again, this is one where, like, if you look at Docker, you typically do something like, I'm going to create a volume because that volume is as big as you want it to be. You know, there's not necessarily restrictions or do volume mapping. Again, this treats it much more like a VM where you have a root file system. You specify how much space you want to allocate towards it. You can live increase it if you want to, but it's not something that is. It's not something that's necessarily just you want to treat as unlimited. So again, it's more like a lightweight VM, and so. And so I'm going to create one here. Which time did I specify?
Wait a minute.
What? Oh,
255.
yeah. So it's a /21. So it's more than one
All right.
word put together.
It took me a second
Yeah. No, it's fine. It's fine.
because it was.
Yeah. So one of the drawbacks of containers is they don't like migrate because it's just a bunch of processes running in a C group, and there's not really a good way to do that as far as like. And let's see, where is that container? So I'm going to create this up with the console. I can't remember what I put in for the username. I think it was. Yep. So it's a Linux container. If I do free m, you know, it shows me how much RAM I have. If I go into resources and bump this up to 10.4, it takes effect immediately. Go back into this thing. It didn't actually restart. You know, it'll show it right there. Same with like PROXMOX-VE, where you can remove it. It's actually gonna. That's what's nice about it. The other thing is if I look at the IP address that I have right here, and I go into my networking and change this right now to be 253. This is a little kind of freaky thing. If you treat it like a VM. If I look at that again, hey, look, my IP address changed. And if I look at network interfaces, hey, that magically got changed as well. So that's one of the magic parts of the LXC containers. I recommend them if you need something that's lightweight. There's things that it's not going to support, like if you want to use a piece of software that supports eBPF inside of it for whatever thing, the extended Berkeley packet filter, these can't do it because they're running in a C group and they don't have access to that sort of thing. So I'm going to keep moving on because I'm running a bit long. So networking, there's a few different ways to approach it. I don't know OVS, but there's the traditional Linux bridging constructs were good enough for me, so that's what I'm using. There's two kinds of bridges. There's VLAN aware bridging and there's traditional bridging. Just figured it was good to note the difference between the two. In VLAN aware bridging, you create one bridge that acts like a switch, and then you attach things to that bridge that have, you know, kind of access VLANs. You can kind of think of it as. So when I attach VM 101 to this bridge over here, I have to specify when I create the NIC to say your VLAN ID is 301, otherwise it will get everything. Same with all these other things. And so, you know, if you want to create an address on the PROXMOX host, you attach it to VM vr0.302, and that'll automatically say, you know, this is VLAN 302. So this is VLAN aware, where the bridge is handling multiple VLANs, and you're passing it through as like one thing. You know, you're connecting it to the outside network as one bridge. The other, which we went with, is just doing traditional bridging, where you take your outside NICs, you bond them together into a link ag, you know, whatever method you want. You create individual VLAN interfaces off these using bond 0.301 or 302. And so you have to create these. It's a little bit of extra work, but I'll tell you why we did it. And then on top of that, you create these VM bridges, one for each bond interface. And then you attach these VMs to that VMBR 301 there, and so on. And so this is a bit more work, but the reason why we do it is because when I go to create a new container or a new VM, and I get into the networking. I'm just going to pull up my existing one. I go look at the networking for these. It gives me a drop down, because otherwise, if you do the VLAN aware bridge in the first model, it's going to show you VMVR0, and that's all it is. And then you have to remember what your VLAN tag is. There's no helpful hints. So that's why I did it this way. Both are valid ways. Don't know why. Don't know why you would choose one or the other apart from this. But it's nice to be able to look at this and say, oh, here's the comment. This is what this VLAN is for. The drawback is that, again, it's a little bit more work. It's a little bit more obscure if you want to like have two separate isolated networks, you know, like a front end network and a back end network on different NICs, different physical NICs. But I don't know.
Well, I think that if you're having to come revisit it after a year or two, it's a bit more visually built
yeah,
than guessing and doing a bunch of writing.
yeah. Because like with VLAN aware bridging, I have to memorize all my numbers. That's the thing, and I'm terrible at that. So that's basically the reason I went this way. I have no clue if there's a performance implication at all here. I doubt it's significant, so we're running with this. So, and nothing's saying you can't change it, because it installs by default like this. Like there's a VMVR0, and it has like, it's just connected to your NIC. So, and then if you want VLANs, you have to choose them. So, so I think I demoed a little bit about the firewalls. It's basic stateful firewall. Under the hood, it uses EV tables. So if you look at EV tables -L or whatever it is, you'll see all the rules that get implemented there. You can actually, those IP sets that I showed you, you can actually use that to protect the host as well. So I was showing as if I was going to go in and protect one of these VMs in here. But I can actually go up to the host level and look at the firewall here, and I can actually, that one's probably not a good example because I just got that one set up. Actually, no, I set this at the data center level. I actually had firewall rules, and all of these get applied to the PROXMOX host as soon as they join the cluster. So all these rules that I have to call out, you know, who can manage these things, these get applied on all the physical nodes. This does not apply to the VMs at all. It just applies to the physical nodes. So, so yeah, it's actually kind of nice. So here's an example where I said, you know, here's the management addresses. They can, you know, ping these things, and then there's no logging here. There's options to get logging out of it. It's not pretty, but it's there. It's better. It's better than nothing. So you'll see stuff like this in the IP tables. It's parsable. We haven't exported it to syslog collector, but you know, probably will at some point. And then again, you can share some resources across VMs and containers. You can share IP sets, security groups like rule templates, and then aliases, which are like basically a name for a single IP address if you want. So I think I'm going to skip over this unless people really want to see it. If you do, call it out, because again, I'm running long. And then I'm probably going to go through the clustering pretty quick again, because I'm at 1 hour and 15, and I apologize for going so long. What's that?
It's a lot of good stuff.
Yeah. So this is my mandatory like soapboxing that I do, where if you're going to talk about data replication or clustering, there's always CAP theorem, which Aaron's probably very familiar with, dealing with databases for a long time. But generally speaking, it's consistency, availability, or partition tolerance. You only get 2 of them. And it's kind of analogous to the good, fast, and cheap. You only pick 2. It's a general property of information systems. Like, so if you're looking at human systems where, like, if you think remote offices, you can actually still apply this a little bit if you kind of squint hard enough, where, you know, if you're dealing with people in a remote office, you know, the things that office provides can be available, and they can be, you know, they can be tolerant to a partition, i.e. no no communication between an office, but that just means you're giving out consistency. So if you think of something like that, like think of a scenario where you might have different groups of people that may have communication issues between them for a period of time. Like you're going to either be consistent or available, and if you're consistent, then you're just going to stop doing stuff. So, so that's kind of the trade-off of a lot of these systems, where if you have a cluster and the cluster sees a node go down, how do you tell if that node is just having a communication issue or if it's actually offline? And it's really, really tough. And so they usually resort to something like a quorum, which is just number of voting members. You have to have over 50%. So if you have 4 nodes, that means you have to have 3 voting, because that's over 50%. You can't just have 2. You have to have a majority rules. And so sometimes you can, like, there's trade-offs you can make where you can say, like, if I'm okay with this being inconsistent for a period of time, as long as it kind of comes together. It's just it's a risk tolerance sort of thing as well. So other systems can also choose between, like, I can be consistent and partition tolerant for a period of time and then switch to another kind of mode where I'm going to go, it's been 5 minutes. I see that the other side has not come back up. I can't figure out if there is a network issue. So I'm going to assume that the other side is offline, and I'm going to go into this availability mode. That remote site is going to shut down, and then the local site's going to bring up replicas of whatever that remote site had. So it's sort of just like a lens to look through. Is like when you see anything that deals with data replication and like, oh, we'll do DR for you, like they still have to make the same decision. Like that decision is always present in that system. So look for it. That's my rant. So there's two kinds of clusters. There's management clustering, which is just a web UI. It's basically taking the management part. It doesn't replicate any of the disks. The quorum rule applies, so you have to have 50% of the nodes, more than 50% of the nodes online for quorum to be reached. 2-node cluster is dangerous because if one node dies, you don't have quorum. So don't create a cluster of 2 nodes unless you're prepared for that. One of the tricks you can do is actually go into the config and say this node has 2 votes, which means that that node can survive without the other one, but it's basically kind of like that one has to be online. If you lose that, you basically don't get to make changes through the UI. I don't think you can spin up new VMs, but the existing ones will still run. It's just kind of going into sort of a safe, like I'm not letting you make changes. And then under the hood, it uses CoreSync, which is just a distributed data store, and it has a fuse-mounted file system in etcpve to manage all that. So you probably noticed that when I was looking at that directory, there was folders for different hosts in there. And so all of that is actually managed in there. So if you go create a file in there, it's going to appear on the other PROXMOX hosts. And it's mostly used for config. It's not used for like data storage or anything like that. And then there's Ceph clustering, which I'm going to sort of breeze through, but they include some nice management tools. The web UI is pretty reasonable for it. And the wiki and forum have common operations. And then there's 2 kinds of things you can do with the Ceph data stores. There's block devices and there's file systems. Again, the same sort of applications are there. You can, CephFS is for ISOs, container images, image templates, and then VM backups if you want to do that. So I'm just going to gloss over this really quick. In Ceph, for components, you sort of have these OSDs, which are disk storage. It's objects, I don't know, it's object storage daemon or something like that. And you typically run 1 per disk. You don't rely on RAID underneath on the machine. You just give it a raw disk and say, here's your storage. And if you have 3 raw disks, you run 3 OSDs, and that's kind of managed as part of Ceph. Over on sort of the part of the cluster is a set of managers and a set of monitors, and the managers and monitors are mostly hands-off, but they're there to determine where things are, to keep track of where things are located in the cluster, And then the monitors are there, I believe, to do admin actions and kind of proxy through that. I don't actually know because you don't really see it. You just need to know that those are there. It's important to have more than one of them, probably 3. So what ends up happening is Ceph has this protocol called Rados, and it's like, it's somewhere. Reliable Autonomous Distributed Object Storage. And it's sort of a generic way of taking some application and storing data, spreading data across cluster. In a typical configuration, you're having 3 replicas of your data, and then so that if any node dies, you at least have 2 left. So in this application, we're doing an RBD or Rados block device, which is presenting a VM image, a disk image, to QEMU or KVM to run that VM. And that's one application. So that sort of client library can spread across those OSDs. The next one is CephFS, which is a little bit more complicated. It is a file system that is shared across all the different nodes. So if you actually go and create a file in one mount point on this node, it'll appear on node 2 and 3 within, milli or microseconds. And there's another set of servers that get managed in here that are metadata. For the most part, you don't need to worry about it. But again, that's just one more application of that Rados library. What's not covered in here is you can have a Rados gateway that acts like an S3 compatible API. So you just want to store a bunch of random objects in here. You can create, Ceph has a built-in S3 compatible gateway. So there's a whole bunch on top of that. There's client embedded code that you can do, but typically not a good idea to play with that. The 2 that we want are CephFS and CephRBD. So
That is very cool.
it is very cool.
It is amazing when it runs that.
Yep. So, but another thing to note on here is if you're doing NVMe, there are some NVMe drives that, since they support multiple read and write queues, you can actually spin up multiple OSDs per NVMe drive. I have not done this, but I do know that some people will do this. They'll partition up an NVMe drive and just start with 5 different OSD daemons per NVMe drive. Just depends on your application, I guess. But if you want to get all the throughput out of an NVMe drive, you may need to do that. There's some other rules. So there's a size and a min size. So size is how many replicas do you want? Min size is how many replicas do you want written before I tell that virtual machine that just stored this precious data with you that the write is complete. So can anybody imagine a scenario where what would happen? Can anybody imagine a drawback if you had size of 3 and a min size of 3? This is the one of those things you might learn the hard way. So if I have size of 3, meaning I must keep 3 copies, and then min size of 3, which means that I must have 3 copies written before I will tell the OS that I have finished writing this data to disk, I've committed it. What might happen is you will never be able to do maintenance on your cluster ever again. Because what's going to happen, you're going to take down one node and then you write some data, let's say Matt Payne is a worker node, and I write some data, it says this data is supposed to be mapped to Aaron, Matt Payne, and Dave. And Matt Payne's unavailable, so I could never return this write and say it's done. So you will always want to keep that to be 1 less than the accepted disk than the size. That way, if there's one node out for maintenance, you will always be able to continue operating your images or operating your storage cluster. And so you can, if something's really critical for you, you can update it to 5 and 3. But what's kind of nice about this is while it does throw away some data, some storage capacity, it is also built on basic, more or less commodity storage. So if you can just get a bunch of disk drives into Ceph, then it kind of manages that resiliency for you. So if a drive fails, you haven't lost, I go back and look at this, if a drive in node 1 fails, I haven't lost all of node 1's capacity, I've just lost a third of it in this case. So
That smart hard drive stuff.
Yeah, so yeah, you can see some smart things in here. And actually, I did have a server start notifying me that just because I had set up the email, I forgot about it. It started messaging me saying that the smart values are going bad ahead of time. So but yeah, you can display the smart values here. Again, you can always go down to the CLI, but you know, on SSDs, again, it's the how much have you written to the disk. This is a 1.8 terabyte drive. I've written to it about 3 times. So, you know, 3 drive writes, and supposedly we get 3,000-ish before it becomes a problem. But so something to keep an eye on. Let's see, backup and restores. This is PROXMOX-Ve's other product is the backup server, and I haven't played with backups that much, but this one is probably the nicest one. It's fairly inexpensive, it's fast, it integrates well, and it can do very quick deduplication, incremental backups, and all that sort of stuff for you. The part that I actually like about it is that it, what it is, it can actually control the permissions. So when you add a backup source like this into PROXMOX, it shows up as a data source. So I actually see this V backup thing in here. I literally go in and I add it as a data store to all these things. And it's, I don't know what API it uses to get in to actually connect to this, but it just shows up. You give it a TLS fingerprint, give it a password, and a service account, because you do have to create a service account for it on the backup server, but it is actually restricted to what it can do. So by default, if I wanted to, I could give it full control over backups, and I'm actually going to go and look at one of these things. So if I go and look at backups, here's all the backups that exist on that backup server, as long as it's going to not, yeah, so here's all the backups that exist. Now, normally I can actually go in and remove one of these backups, but I've actually configured it so that that backup server won't let any of the things that are doing the backups, the VE nodes, to actually erase it. So when I try to erase it, it's going to say client permission failed, like I don't have permission to do this in this particular data store. So that's one of the nice parts about this, is you can actually separate it out. And again, same licensing applies. It's pretty simple. PROXMOX backup server is a separate license, but it is simple. It's you get a free version that you can use for basically ever. It's pretty nice. And if I do like let's take a look at backup. I can actually just run a backup now, and it's reasonably fast. It actually tracks it uses dirty bitmaps to track when things were last backed up. And I don't entirely understand how that works under the hood, but I do know the results are pretty fast for these things. So it's just doing an incremental backup on data it thinks has changed. And then on the server side, apparently it does some deduplication for you. So, but it's pretty easy to do backups, and they are more or less pretty quick. So.
Okay, I'm gonna catch up on the chat here a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So we've had a discussion about, first of all, Ben has been talking about the notes are great.
Oh,
You
yeah.
can use Markdown in those.
I didn't actually know that. I should probably use that. I think that's when you go to the summary.
We've had a discussion on how big should a cluster be, and I think we've gone anywhere from 3 to 9, but definitely an odd number.
Yes, that's actually a general rule if you're running a cluster, is that uses like quorum-based just election mechanics, or your quorum-based like any sort of quorum-based mechanics is always an odd number, because that way you will always have one win. So if I have 8 nodes, like if you really, this is probably a bad idea, but if I had 8 nodes in the same cluster that are geographically separated, and I have a wide area network connection outage, then both sides have lost quorum. Yeah. So you have just taken both sides down.
Chad notes that third-party support for VDI and he thinks for Docker are available.
Oh, cool.
Is that Chad, is that Docker or our Docker? No, I think that's exactly. It's Docker.
Say that one more time, John?
He was reading the text, that's all.
I lost you. You got really quiet.
That's Dave who's talking, and he was talking about your question.
Oh, Dave, can you say that one more time?
Dave, repeat your thing.
You said you're saying that it's third-party support for Docker, right?
I believe there's third-party support for Docker. In general, you could probably throw Docker on Debian and run Portainer if you really wanted to do it.
Yeah.
Or stand up your own Kubernetes cluster running underneath the hood. But there's definitely a project out there for third-party support for VDI.
Okay.
So yeah, that's actually a really good point. When you create a container, one of the options you get is container nesting. I think it's checked by default now, but that basically lets you have a C group inside of a C group. And as soon as you do that, then like you can more or less I can install Docker on a LXC container without issue. So
I don't know about everybody else online, but volume went way down.
say that again. Can you say that again?
Can you put that in the chat, please?
So, yeah. And the other thing that I think I was misguided when I first started using this, because I think I created a lot of things as privileged, and I didn't need to. Privileged containers are generally considered bad because they can create block devices and things like that and get escape their channel, so to speak. Like I don't think you really need that anymore. If you're doing like sharing hardware, I think you might need to. I think there are ways to pass through paths into the LXC container, and there are ways to map hardware in, but again, that gets into CLI stuff, and go look at the wiki. If you're doing that, you're doing it for specialized reasons. Oh yeah, snapshots and restores are there, so if you need a snapshot, you can create them. Like upgrade. I'm going to do something really stupid, so I'm going to do a snapshot. They're pretty lightweight. You can roll back to it. You can, do the standard thing. In fact, the snapshots are used for backups. I don't think I just backed up one VM. I think I actually backed up the whole thing. So it's doing a full backup of the entire cluster now. Whoops. Oh well, it'll be fine. So, any other questions? There.
So if you want to get started in this with a home lab, is a budget of $1,000 to $2,000 of
Yeah.
ballpark.
Yeah, I mean, like basically you need a PC to run it. You can either buy a used one. You can pick one out that you already have. Like it'll run on anything that's like reasonably new Intel or AMD hardware. As long as you can install Linux on it, you can probably get it up and running. And then just download the ISO to install it. There's probably, I think I figured out a way to burn that to USB drive. I had to go look at the forums or something. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. I think I ended up, like the machine I built 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, was 64 gigs of RAM, an AMD Ryzen, and it was about $1,000, had a decent power supply in it. Fairly nice core count, but again, like you can throw it on anything. In fact, if you have a VMware machine, a VMware server, you can install this in a VMware instance to just to try it out. But again, that's nested virtualization. Make sure you do all that stuff to make that happen. Yep. I think there's some other backup options. This one was one that we looked at. It's called BackE2, and it can back up your Ceph RBD device volume straight to S3, and it does like different diffs for them, and which was really cool. But it only did Ceph volumes. It did not do anything else. So if you had local storage, it wouldn't do those. Similar story with EVE or PVE, so that's an option. But yeah, this is pretty good. So we're actually using a backup server in AWS. We just created some local disks for it, and it's running there. It's doing a good enough job. So, and again, budget-wise, if you want to pay for a license, you always can, but they don't really require it. You can use the free version. It just takes a little work to get it set up.
I would love to read your slides, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I'll share them.
Thanks.
So,
Awesome.
thank you. Sorry I went so long.
No, I'm not. Thanks for
Okay.
going so long.
You're running this in production, right?
We are going to. We are running. Right now, we're running this in our development lab, but as soon as we get the hardware in to actually run this, which we ordered months ago, we are going to run it in production. So we're going to have 5 machines, I think. 5 machines with like 5 NVMe drives in each, and then they're going to be 1.8 terabyte drives, and then some of which is going to be local storage, some of it's going to be clustered and then I think we're going to have like a 0.5 terabyte of RAM in each of them. So that's going to be our hosting stack. So I think everybody's pretty comfortable with it though. So I'm going to, yeah, by the way, I just want to show this while I'm here. So I have the root disks. I can't, oh, that's a container. I can't. Let's get the wood demo. So this is, everything has its warts. And this is, there's no exception here. So I can take all my disks here and I can move the storage over to that Ceph block and delete this source after it gets moved. And I can start all these things up and get it moved. But what I can't do is this cloud init drive, which is an ISO file system, I can't move it. It doesn't give me an option to migrate it. So if I want to take everything off of local storage and put it into Ceph cluster storage, I can't, because right now this is using my local NVMe block device. So that's, I can't live migrate it, which is like, I can live migrate it across machines, but I can't take that 4 meg ISO and migrate it from one thing to another. It just will not let me do it. I suspect it's a UI thing, but it's just, again, those are the words. Like once your system is up and running, you probably don't actually need cloud init drive. So what I typically do is I'll remove them. Oh, it's not gonna let me do that because I'm doing a disk migration. Yeah, you're gonna watch something in timeout. Yeah, so what's that? Okay. So I think if nobody has any questions, I'm going to wrap it up. Okay. Just some time. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Doing 2 talks, one on Ceph, one on.
Yeah, I know.
Ceph is a must, right?
It really is.
When it's working, it's amazing. In fact, I mean, just to throw a bunch of cheap disks at it. I know a guy, a friend of mine who put multi-raspberry Pi cluster just to test the Ceph one.
Yeah.
Get out of here for a minute. Let me get out for a minute. Okay. Thank you very much, James. I'm really looking forward to there's some spots in there that I definitely want to rewatch for some of my lab work. Just to remember, a reminder that the August meeting will be Zoom only, and I am still looking for a presenter. Thank you very much. That's it.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to stop the recording.